Okay, so hello everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm here today with Mr. Nicolas Money, or Nick Money for short, which apparently, I was just chatting to him, is his name that he got from his adoptive parents. Great name. And
Professor Nick Money. Don't remove my hard-won doctoral degree.
Oh my God, did I do that? Oh
Yeah,
dear.
we've got to establish a hierarchy here, at least in
Professor, yeah, Professor Nick Money. And I don't know a lot about you, but I was recommended to speak to you and I'm looking forward to it. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I can tell you a lot about myself as a horrific narcissist. No, I'm an Anglo-American academic. I'm a fungal biologist. That's my area of scientific expertise, but I'm a science writer and I've written a good deal about microorganisms and more recently about human biology and the human condition. And what? Last month I turned 60. I obviously, as you can tell from the image here, have the appearance of a considerably younger hominid. What else? I live in Oxford, Ohio, and I actually teach at a university. It's called Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, named for the Native Americans. So it's got nothing to do with the state of Florida. And I've lived in the United States since 1986. And what else? There seems to be somebody, a lawn spray behind you. Hopefully that's what it is. Or so anything else? No, we can talk about the status of Homo sapiens, which is we are a species headed for quite rapid extinction in my humble but nevertheless correct view. And yeah, that's about all I have in terms of background.
Okay, well, thank you for that background. Can you you sent me a chapter from your book. Can you tell us about the book you wrote, or maybe books you have written?
Yeah, no, I mean I've written a number of volumes, but the book that's most pertinent to your interest is a book called The Selfish Ape: Human Nature and Our Path to Extinction. And it was written as a series of, there are 10 chapters, brief chapters that talk about the biology of humans, our origins, and our place in the solar system and the galaxy. And so it's a popular science book. The last chapter, the title of it was Greenhouse, How We Make Things Worse. And I think that was the chapter that I shared with you. So in essence, this is sort of a distillation of my wisdom, not about in my area of scientific expertise, which is the biology of the fungi, but really what have I learned about our place in the greater scheme of things. And it seems to me, so first of all, some of these observations are anecdotal, and I'll come to that shortly. But in essence, we've had it. We're on a swift path to extinction, although I can't give you a precise timeline. I can make some educated guesses. But the point that I make in the book too is that this is inevitable. It was inevitable. From the time we crawled from the Rift Valley as modern humans, perhaps 100,000 years ago, we've been on this path. We've accelerated this endpoint through science and technology. So as a scientist, that's interesting to me, that as an experimental scientist relying in broad terms on the methods that were generated, were developed with great eloquence by a philosopher called Francis Bacon in the 17th century, the experimental method, inductive investigations. I mean, Bacon talks about bringing down the fruits from heaven through science, through experimentation. in a way that would improve our lot. And we're the beneficiaries of science, this scientific approach. And most of us, all of us, benefit from the fruits of, for example, modern medicine, but many other areas of technological endeavor. The problem is with this that in terms of energy transfer, this process has actually ramped up the way that we've impacted the rest of the biosphere. So through modern agriculture and fishing, modern agriculture and fishing, we've had a tremendous impact on the rest of nature, that is deleterious not just to us, but also the other organisms with which we share the planet. And through burning fossil fuels, which again was almost, we could see this as predestined, that using Bacon's method, through the scientific method, eventually we'd find ways of generating masses of energy by burning these long fossilized sources of energy. And so this combination, and the point that I make in that chapter then, the combination of agriculture, industry, industrial pollution, including, and perhaps most importantly, the release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere over the last more than a century, we've royally fucked the planet, and that means that we're headed for annihilation one way or another. And we could talk more about how that may come about. But the important point I'm making, this is sort of hard baked into our DNA, being consumers, being avaricious in our nature, actually being warlike too. This is a part of our essential makeup, as is making babies and making more of them. Population now above, or around 8 billion human beings. Maybe I'll just say a couple of other things here. So I live in Ohio, which is sort of seen from outside this Garden of Eden as a sort of very bland part of America. But where I live, it's surprisingly beautiful, and it was deforested in the 18th and 19th centuries. Forests have regrown. There are places that I can hike quite close to where I live, where I can go without seeing another person for even all day, at least on a weekday. And as a biologist, I've been looking at nature every day for the last, I'm 60 years old, every day. But I think particularly for sort of through more professional lenses over the last few decades. And even in my backyard in Ohio, but in the forests that surround this area, the losses in the number of individuals of different species. So I'm not talking about the extinction of species of plants and animals, although that certainly happened. The losses are they're so palpable. What astonishes me is that many of my professional colleagues don't seem to recognize this. When I talk to them, they see me as, I'm not sure what the Anglophilic term is, chicken little, the sky is falling. That's the way that I think that I'm seen sometimes, and I share this and discuss this with my students. But I think I'm seen as somewhat of a maverick for saying these things, which is, I find strange. I suppose in a professional sense, I feel quite lonely as a result of that. Why is it that I'm saying this? And in the rare occasions where I sort of debate this with colleagues, I get a fair degree of pushback that doom and gloom and things really aren't as bleak as you think. Now, the observations I make in my backyard, my garden, anecdotal, but hey, they mesh with all of the peer-reviewed larger scientific studies on, for example, insect biodiversity. Another thing I shared the other day is roadkill, the absence thereof. So we're all mad about cars in this country. We drive everywhere, and I'm no different from other Americans as a naturalized citizen here. I'm used to seeing lots of dead animals, mammals on the road. Also, I always stop if I see, we have these lovely reptiles called box turtles that come out of the woods, and these poor things get squashed on the roads. I used to see hundreds of these in a spring, summer in Ohio just a few years ago. And I'd always stop the car and get out if it was safe, and be superhero to the reptiles and save these animals from getting squashed. Where I go out in the woods here almost every day, every morning I'd see box turtles on. I don't think I've seen, I think I've seen one box turtle this year. Now, I'm not an expert on reptiles. I don't know where they're going. Certainly some people are collecting them as pets, which is a bad idea. But these are profound changes in the biosphere that I'm seeing on the local level. And this supports my contention, which is of course held by many other people, that the damage to the biosphere is on a vast scale. We can see this locally, nationally, globally. And so the future is rather bleak. Let me say one more thing, and then I'll shut up, and we can do some back and forth here. But I write in this chapter in the book. I also take I'm a bit of a critic of technological solutions to this mess. I mean, I describe electrically powered cars and solar panels as funeral decorations for our planet. I mean, the idea that any of these technological solutions, technological endeavors are going to provide a solution to climate change is, I think, astonishingly naive. But it's perhaps even worse than that. If we do a thought experiment where we say that seeding the oceans with iron, which is one of these sort of geoengineering projects, seed the oceans with iron, the element iron, and that this will cause blooms in phytoplankton, photosynthetic plankton, algae, that will absorb lots of carbon dioxide, which is, the evidence is not there. It would have lots and lots of knock-on effects that would be quite terrifying. However, let's just say that it worked. Let's say that this was fantastic. We sopped up the carbon dioxide. Global climate change we dealt with that one. You can just see somebody on the TED Talk stage, right? God, I hate TED Talks. And because they're so simplistic. And let's say we did this. What would we do? The population would continue to grow. Agriculture would continue. Any human activities come with associated pollution. We'd still destroy the planet. Perhaps it would even make things worse over sort of a time scale that means anything to me, given that I'm 60 years old. I could say lots more, but that's sort of a summary of my view of things. In terms of antinatalism, because obviously I know that resonates with your viewers. My guess is that I would not have been an antinatalist.
Some of my viewers, it resonates very much with me, but I only brought the antinatalism to the conversation when I found out about it. I'm a father of 3. I only found out about it 5 years ago when I was 50 years old, and I've been quite prolific in sharing the idea in comedic ways and provocative ways. But a lot of the people that watch my stuff really don't like it, and I understand why. But
I mean, I'm a father, but I'm a stepfather. I'm a proud stepfather. I acquired 2 young children when I got married, and they're now wonderful grown individuals, adults. But that means that therefore frankly, I could commute to work in a coal burning Learjet and my carbon footprint would be less than yours because you've had three offspring. So, you know, whoa, I'm waiting for that medal. But yeah, besides of course, and some of your subscribers will would agree with this. I mean, besides its effect upon, you know, adding more consumers, there is also the ethical issue of having a baby at this time, and what kind of a world are they going to experience? I mean, I've lived a complicated but, you know, rather blessed life. I didn't think about these kind of issues when I was a student in my 20s. I mean, it didn't seem like it at the time, but what a carefree existence I lived, really, in the sort of early in the early 1980s. And I love my students that I interact with today. They're such inspiring young people, but, you know, I can't tell them. I worry. I mean, I'm concerned for their future and the kind of opportunities that will be available to them. But that's an even broader subject. So on many levels, having biological children is having your own biological children is something that we at least need to think far more carefully about. Actually, I do ask my students, especially young women students, about this in class, you know. And a few years ago in Ohio, pretty much all of them wanted to have, you know, we're talking about big families in British terms, you know, oh yeah, 3 or 4 children at least. You know. Today, I ask the same question. I tell you, the majority of my women students, they're not really looking forward to being mothers, which is really interesting. This is not because of any influence that I have. They've already thought this through. They're smart young people, and their view of this is very, very different from somebody, an American, at least, even, you know, just five years ago.
It's interesting that you bring it up because I talk a lot about it, and as I said, it's so counter to people's natural, their natural instincts, and it really triggers a lot of people, and in a way, I think that part of the conversation that I think would be useful to have is to persuade people to think about if they want to have a family, that they should actively go about it in a way that doesn't have to necessarily be their own biological family.
Yeah.
You see, the fact that you ended up being a stepdad, I assume that wasn't done consciously. That just happened. I mean, you didn't go out looking for someone who had children, did you? Or did you?
No, but that is interesting. I mean, I was adopted myself. There's a larger story there that frankly should be on primetime television, because I'm going to meet my biological brother just a few weeks from now. Full biological brother. He sent me an email a couple of months ago. I'd never met him. I've never met this individual. He's a couple of years older than me. So that's an interesting story. And my own adoption was adopted by these wonderful parents, school teachers in Oxford. I wonder how much of that experience sort of did influence me, because even after I married with 2, you know, small children, we could have had our own biological children, but I didn't choose to do so. I don't see the experience that I had as a stepfather was every bit as rich, I would imagine, as the experience of a biological parent. It was certainly as financially
of course,
extractive. But no, I love my children.
In a way, there is an advantage. You know, people often say, well, you know, I don't want to have to look after somebody else's children. I want to look after my own children. Yeah. And, you know, one of the responses to that is, well, you know, we've got a dog. We got a dog last year. I didn't give birth to the dog, but we still all love it to bits. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's I'm sure it's just as rewarding and challenging. And there is also an aspect, I don't know if you were ever aware of this, but one of the really difficult things for me, I think, coming across antinatalism is that I became more acutely aware that I had brought these people into existence without really thinking about it properly, without thinking about, well, why am I doing this, right? Because I was in such a natalist environment, as I call it. You know, everyone I'd ever seen around me, I was brought up as Orthodox Jewish. And in that culture, like, everybody has children, and people who can't have children are seen as, like, you know, sad, poor, sad people who, you know, there are charities to help these people, etc., etc. And so therefore I never even met anybody who had not had a child of their biological child by choice, yeah, until maybe my 30s, I don't know. And so me and my wife, we're going to have children just like everybody else, and just like everything else that we do in our lives. But after I found out about antinatalism, I became more acutely and consciously aware that I had created these beings that could suffer and will suffer and die. And yes, they you know, thankfully I took what I regard as a terrible risk. But thankfully, so far they're pretty cool and they're doing well, and they're, you know, on the whole, yeah. But watching them suffer is one of the most difficult, painful things for me. And what compounds that pain is that I am the cause of it ultimately, because I created them really for no good reason. Yeah, I didn't do it for them. And one of the advantages of being a step parent like you are is that, you know, you've done a great act of kindness, and an incredible generosity when you think about it. Yeah, just like your parents did, your adoptive
right.
yeah.
Although,
and you're not
also to be, to be fair to my my children, then also they over time accepted me as stepdad, and so I mean that was a very rewarding, has been and still is a very rewarding experience for me. I tell you one thing that's interesting is that I'd always I think I would have made a good grandfather. You know, in a way, I'd love a grandchild to sort of lavish, you know, attention, resources upon, when it suited me. You know, I don't want them full time because I'm a busy, busy man. But neither of my stepchildren, and both of them are in long-term relationships. One of them is married. They're not at this point planning to have children. And that absolutely did. This was never a suggestion on my part or my wife's part. I think we both assumed that they would at some point have children and that we'd become grandparents. But now that doesn't seem to be you know, in the going to happen, which is, I have to say, when I think about it, there's a big sense of loss there. Sort of, you're talking about being sort of within a natalist environment, but I'd grown up with wonderful grandparents, and so I had some good modeling for what a good granddad would be. And I mean, the universe doesn't care about me, absolutely, and why should she? I'm not owed grandchildren, but I mean that's something that I would have enjoyed. But I don't know whether that's any more important than saying, I don't know. I really don't think I'm ever going to own a Rolls Royce. Is it really? Yeah, I guess it's worse than that, because it's more meaningful than missing out on, you know, driving around and impressing my neighbors. But still, I wonder about that. To what degree is my response? Oh, I want grandchildren. To what degree is that just a learned behavior versus something biological? I guess learned, because I had great relationships with my grandparents.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I have told my children many times, and they know full well that I really do not want to have grandchildren. Yeah. And you know, I get criticized a lot, and my wife completely disagrees with me on this. I'd like to just, because I think it's really, I think it's one of the mistakes that so many of us make in this world is and we've been trained to think like this, is to we have these desires and we go with them, and we've been trained to do that by so much of the consumerism. Yeah, but actually, what I think would be a much wiser thing to do is, I've asked thousands of people why they want to have children. Yeah, and I've actually offered prizes to people if they can come up with a good logical and ethical explanation as to why they think it's okay to bring someone into existence, because I don't think it is. And when I ask people, often the response is, well, because I want to have a family, or I want to have children. Yeah. And the mistake I believe we make as humans is just to go with our wants, rather than asking, well, hold on a second, why do I want to have children? Or why do I want to eat this ice cream? You know, and if we get to the bottom of that, we might then realize, actually, maybe I'm better off without the ice cream. You know, I want to have the ice cream because I'm actually feeling a bit anxious right now, so I want it to take the edge off. Yeah. So I'm wondering, like, what's behind your desire to have grandchildren? I think I've got a bit of an idea, but I'm just going to ask you first. What's that?
It's interesting.
Yeah. Why do you want that?
Let me think. This is good. This is a free therapy session now. Why do I really want? I suppose it's narcissistic, isn't it? Because as I titled the book, The Selfish Ape, it is narcissistic. I think I'd love that feedback, but I think there is that on those of us that are somewhat well-adjusted mentally. I think we have a love of young, in the best sense of the word, a love of young children. I do. I mean, if I wasn't a professor, I'd love to be a sort of teacher, elementary school teacher. That the idea of this sort of unformed or forming human, and that impressionable mind, and that young children have this fabulous sense of humor that I think we a lot of humans lose in adolescence. But they get the point, that they understand satire and so forth. So I love interacting with little kids. And so there's a bit of biology there, but in the end, it's, for me, right, it is still acquisitive. It's the idea of my unborn grandson or granddaughter, that they love granddad. He's the best, right? And he takes me to the park. He shows me things in the woods. So my guess is that's the answer. It's not that I would feel sort of fulfilled in other ways, like without grandchildren, people sort of, I'd go up in people's estimation, which is a long way to go. But, having grandchildren, he's a great granddad. So no, I think it's more that maybe one-on-one connection with a grandchild.
Yeah, go on.
I was just going to add to that, though. So absolutely, my desire for that, then, tremendously selfish, brings somebody brings another consciousness into existence. Suffering is the only thing that is guaranteed. I think David, is it Bentar? Who actually wrote for my book?
Yeah, David
Benatar, brilliant. I mean, he just, I love his work. Suffering is the guaranteed part of it. There's one step beyond that that's actually even a bit bleaker, but is also sort of fulfilling. Not that I'd wish that suffering on anybody or anything. The good thing about suffering is it does come to an end. And that experience of suffering, no matter how awful it is going to come to a close with the loss of, with death, with the end of that consciousness. One could argue, therefore, that in the interim, if the experience of that consciousness is positive, that it's worthwhile. I mean, I have no belief in wider meaning, but that's something that I think about. I think about that in terms of our extinction, but also the extinction of all of these animals whose lives non-human animals whose lives we're ruining. The good news is that when they're gone, there won't be any more suffering. And I wrote an essay on this that was published in a magazine in Seattle, and it'll be elsewhere. But anyway, sort of the good news about extinction, which is on this longer term, the sooner we get things over with and indeed destroy the sentient part of the planet, the better. At least then we'll have a planet for a while that will revolve on its soft axle, as John Milton put it, without suffering for the first time in a couple of 100 million years. There's no brains on the planet. No, that's pretty cool. But does that justify having a child or encouraging somebody to have a child, a grandchild for me? I don't know.
I think that, by the way, I think there probably is another bit to it, which is what I'm sort of gathering from you, also from your experience of your own grandparents. There's maybe another aspect that you'd be a good grandparent, not just in terms of, you'd be I assume that you would see yourself as a wise grandparent that could help this child navigate through life. Is there an element of that?
Yes, and I mean that I suppose that relates to me as a college professor. I mean, I have that. I take that role. My influence over my students is, one has to admit, very limited, but still, I can sometimes help them through the wisdom of age, help them with some of their struggles, although that's a complicated issue in American academia in terms of that professional relationship with students. How far do you go in actually talking about personal issues? But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, so where I was sort of going with that, and this is just not just for you, but for other people who are thinking a bit more carefully about having children and grandchildren, is that if that is also part of the motivation, then you can, like you already are getting part of that, as you say, in your work, but also you can do that without having your own grandchildren. Your friends' grandchildren, for example, you can spend a little bit of time with them and enjoy their company and their humor, and you can support them if necessary, without having to have it be the direct descendants of your stepchild in this case, or in your wife's case, of child.
I had a brief and hideous experience quite a number of years ago. I believe it was through Twitter, which I don't do now, and I haven't done. I had this brief burst of activity on Twitter. This is a good few years ago, with a journalist that was writing for the New York Times, and he'd written a piece about a mother who had given birth to multiple children, and forgive me, I don't remember the specifics. This is a good few years ago. Let's say the number was 5, but all of them suffered from a crippling inherited disease. I believe it was a form of cystic fibrosis. There's many forms thereof. And they were talking about the suffering of the children and how much this was incurring in terms of medical care. But the children were spread across a good few years. And I dared to tweet something online about, did she ever consider maybe not having the second, third, fourth, or fifth child, given that this was clearly diagnosed as this, in this case, with this particular condition. So this was clearly shown to be an inherited disease, one that her offspring would almost certainly carry. And I was charged online, and I'm glad I've almost no social media presence whatsoever. I mean, the stuff came in, you Nazi what? You want to control women's reproductive habits, and you think disabled children should be euthanized. I mean, I said, bam, that was it. That was my one Twitter experience, and I was gone. It was But you talk about moral responsibility. Wow. Especially when you know that suffering is going to come in these tremendously palpable, harmful terms. I mean, it's suffering's inevitable, but not that kind of suffering.
Yeah, okay. So I wanted to just go back to a couple of things. Firstly, I wanted for you to, can you share with us a little bit about how quickly, in your professional view, how quickly you think this is going to go downhill? Can you give us any kind of indication of our lifetimes, or 10, 20, 30, 50, what kind of things you're expecting? That's number one. Number two, I assume that people like, I've forgotten his name exactly, Lomberg, something like that, famous.
Excuse me, I'll kill that. I'm sorry. These things happen, don't they? If I could kill it, I would. I'm going to kill this. I'm sorry to the universe. Oh God, that won't happen again. Excuse me.
No problem. No problem. It's easy to happen. Okay, so what I was saying is, do you dismiss out of hand, I presume, the guys? There's a I think he's from Norway or Sweden or something. He's a
Bjorn Lomborg, right?
That's him, yeah.
Lomborg, yeah.
Is his ideas and his views, are they just nonsense?
Yeah. So timeline and I think that, so this is sort of out of my area of expertise, really. But I mean, one of his arguments is that our ability to adapt, we've shown ourselves to be, an ingenious species, sapient man, that will adapt to this. He does recognize that the suffering in relation to climate change will play out more forcibly in some countries than others. You look at a country like, well, I'm not going to name a country, but we could talk about some very problematic places. So yeah, the first world will have a better ability to respond to these changes. What I would say is, however, if we look at the multitude of problems that are facing us as a species, so climate change, absolutely, but let's also look at the impact of agriculture. And when I see the loss of organisms, animals in my area, I doubt, this is not something that I have, performed mathematical modeling on. I suspect that it's agriculture that's doing this. It's genetically modified crops and the use of pesticides on those crops. And in addition to these forests that I mentioned, we're surrounded by corn, so maize growing, genetically modified to kill insect pests. And those vast areas of cornfields around me, they look very pretty, but there's no insect life at all. Spiders have also disappeared from those fields, because not from a direct effect of the insecticides in all probability, but rather they've just run out of things to eat. We see this in terms of bat populations too. Loss of insects, bats are suffering. So I think when we look at the larger mess that we've made, even if we do solve one thing, I think we don't solve another. However, also, if you have living in the United States and seeing the risk of forest fires now in large parts of the country, and I used to live out west, this has changed swiftly, and this is something that yeah, wealthy people can move elsewhere. If they've got insurance, they can rebuild. But and this is from a first world perspective. I think that he does a disservice in terms of not recognizing just how bad things are. And as I said earlier, if you think that you can sort of, if just by buying a Tesla and driving in a plug-in car, the energy's got to come from somewhere, and we're so far from we're so far from electrifying that the fleet of vehicles in this country. But again, even if we did, this isn't a long-term solution. But in terms of the timeline, I can't speak to that. I look at climate models. We seem to be well on track, if not a little bit ahead of some of the best and most sort of synthetic models, in terms of bringing synthesis, bringing lots of things together. I can't speak to that. I think probably my greater concern actually comes with loss of insects, that this is happening so fast. You know, these fantastically interesting studies from the United Kingdom performed by the RSPB, Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, is doing this work and just looking at how many things are sticking to your what do you call them, headlamps. I'm trying to be bilingual here. That may be a greater threat, but in terms of us being able to continue our privileged existence, Lomborg may be right that someone like me will fingers crossed, things will keep going pretty good for another 20 years. I doubt it. I used to think that all of these things would come long after my departure, but I'm no longer convinced of that. Things are changing very swiftly enough that if you're a young person thinking about whether or not to have children, now's the time to be thinking about it. I think most young people, well, that's not true, is it?
No.
My privileged sort of college age children in this part of Ohio think about it, but most people are not considering this.
I remember I listened recently to a Joe Rogan podcast with Michio Kaku. Are you familiar with that guy?
Yeah, I read one of his books recently. I forget the title. It was very good. Yeah.
The guy, and he was speaking about AI, and he was saying that that he was speaking about aliens, and that scientific community have changed their view on aliens, and he thought that there are there's the book.
I mean, just to prove it, I just read that, The God Equation. That's a good book.
Cool.
Not as good as The Selfish Ape, but nevertheless, it's a good read.
He was talking about that he thought that there's bound to be other civilizations out there, and that they, if the civilization was 100 years, that he had some kind of categorization that, if a civilization was 100 years ahead of us, then they would have a certain technology, and if they were 1,000 years ahead of us, that they've spotted these aliens, alien spaceships or whatever they call them, alien crafts that don't, that don't burn any energy, and that if we were 1,000 years time, if in 1,000 years time, they will have technology that we can't imagine and can't get our heads around. Do you think that's a possibility? And that, maybe our way of life will fall apart and a lot of people will die, but that some people will be left, and eventually they will find technology which is, and there seems to be signs that the World Economic Forum is kind of quite keen to move to transhumanism as soon as possible. And then, once they get to transhumanism, then they can we won't need to necessarily have the food, we might be able to just have some pill or something, or some, I don't know,
how marvelous life will be. Yeah.
Do you think that that's possible, that we can't foresee what the technology could be like in 100 or 1,000 years time?
I don't think we've got long enough to wait. I'll tell you one thing about the aliens, though. They're out there, Planet Zeta, very smart, and they're watching us right now. So they're more technologically advanced than us, and they've been looking around in the galaxy, and they're watching us because they know exactly where we're at. In other words, they have seen multiple planets, Goldilocks planets, generate life and then destroy themselves, destroy itself. At some point, something like us evolves and ruins the planet. That seems almost inevitable. So they're watching us, and they know exactly what stage we're at right now. And so in their classrooms, they're studying Earth among many other planets, and they're saying, well, you know, the teacher would say, well, what stage is Earth at? If they wouldn't call it Earth, Planet 7. What stage is Planet 7 at? And all these sort of noodly appendages go up, and you know, it's stage 4, miss. And she said, what stage is that? And she says, well, there is no stage 5. You know, they know where we're at. They're waiting for us to go. You know, nuclear war too, of course, with the lovely Vladimir. I mean, it could be that we're heading in that direction too. But one way or another, I'm not sure that answers your question. I mean, it was interesting that in late in life, Stephen Hawking actually wrote a number of essays. He wrote a number of articles in which he referred to sort of the mess that we'd made of Earth, and that we need to be thinking very seriously about colonizing other Goldilocks planets, which is interesting. I mean, obviously the man was a genius as a physicist. I think as a anyway, I think that's not wasn't his smartest move. I mean, you think about the nearest Goldilocks planet is I remember, like 4 point something light years away from here. It would take us an immense amount of time at the current, you know, using current technology to reach a planet like that. Tens or hundreds.
Sorry, I'm a bit ignorant. What's a Goldilocks planet?
Oh yeah, so Goldilocks planet. So now that we've recognized that many stars of an appropriate stage in their existence and also mass, they have planetary systems. We know that this is the case. I mean, this was predicted long ago, but a solar system like ours is not unique. Many planets, many stars have solar systems, maybe all stars. They've got other bodies revolving around them, not like that, like that. A Goldilocks planet is a planet that appears to exist in a propitious orbit. So it's not too close to the sun that any liquid water would evaporate. It's not too far away that it would freeze. And so at least if it's a watery planet in that position, Goldilocks is just right. And so life is probably emerges there. I mean, the problem there is, as a biologist, I mean, it's the great unsolved question, is how life originates. But it did here. Why would it not do so elsewhere if the chemistry and physics were appropriate? So yeah, we're a Goldilocks planet, although not for too much longer. And well, that's not true. Being more positive, right? So when we're gone, the planet will repopulate. Our sun is only about halfway through its useful cycle in terms of warming the planet sufficiently to to support life. Not too much, not too little, and then it'll. There's billions of years to come yet.
Okay. I wanted to come back to one other point. I have been to Extinction Rebellion protests many times, and being the provocative, naughty boy that I am, I have often said to them, why are you protesting against extinction? I'd say, bring it on. Bring on extinction. Well, what's the problem? You know, and I say to them, it's usually with a megaphone. I don't know if you've seen the way I do this, right? But I go with a megaphone and I just speak to them directly, and they get really confused and angry, and it's quite ironic, all of it. I say to them, the thing is that we are all going extinct. You know, I am going extinct, and in a way, I can't remember who turned the phrase, but many of us have all these immortality projects, which are not really immortality projects, they're delusionary immortality projects, of which children are often one. People want them to carry on forever, and so they have these children as these immortality projects, but in reality we are all going to go extinct anyway. I'm going to go extinct. Why do I want to, why would I want to just keep this whole game going? As far as I can tell, I don't know if you'd agree with me on that or not.
Yeah, I think so. And it's in terms of the sort of earlier therapy session too, that I'm an open book. I mean, having studied fungal biology professionally for many years, I have professional credentials in the area of death and decomposition. I've been studying this for my, during my academic career. And I honestly have never seen that as a negative. I mean, I don't look forward to being dead. I don't look forward to my loved ones being dead, but I know, at least if they were given a ecologically sensitive burial, I love the idea of this sort of final contribution to the carbon cycle through decomposition. Bring it on. I won't be conscious, of course, during that period. I don't look forward to that from my conscious position, but yeah, this desperate clawing at some idea of immortality. Of course, even with children and grandchildren, it just takes a few generations, and who do we know? I mean,
yeah, I mean, in 300 years' time, nobody will have ever heard of any of us.
Right. So you better just accept that. So, do you think that members of Extinction Rebellion are in themselves being very narcissistic then in their wishes, their policy proposals? I don't know. I need to think about that more. I'm not gonna.
It's an interesting thing to maybe to speak to some people. And I don't usually do a lot of interviews, but I've got some, maybe to speak to people from Extinction Rebellion. I do have an interview on my channel with Roger Hallam, who's one of the creators of Extinction Rebellion. And I kind of tried to sort of get him towards, why are you so bothered about extinction? But I wanted to bring you to that point, because I know that you've had a discussion with the person that introduced me to you. You had a discussion about that you yourself are, I mean, you've kind of touched on this, but I would just like maybe just if you've got anything more to say about the idea of, of bringing on extinction, of there's nothing that on the contrary, that extinction, in a way, like you said, the fact that suffering is going to end is a good thing, right? Because if it went on forever and ever, that's awful, right? And
yeah.
So do you have anything more to say about the fact that, you think we're going to go extinct, you think it's going to happen fairly soon and fairly quickly, yeah? And do you welcome it?
Increasingly. I mean, the thing that some of the news items that upset me personally the most, the things that really cause me grief, actually are in the area of non-human suffering. So animals that are suffering greatly in their natural environments. I also think a lot about, many years ago, I was involved in animal research, not anything too, well, it's hideous for the animals involved, no doubt. I did experiments on squid, very, very smart, sensitive, adaptive creatures. That would be impossible for me today. If we think about animals that are racing towards extinction, this can be let's think about one of David Attenborough popularized or introduced us to mountain gorillas. You think about these animals, diminishing populations, increasing pressure from humans, still hunted, the suffering and the suffering that they incur through that through being hunted. And when one of those animals is lost, the grief that's experienced by other gorillas. I mean, this is a great tragedy. No greater than the activities in the Colosseum in Colosseums in the Roman Empire. But when these animals are gone, they won't suffer anymore. The extinction of the last mountain gorilla. Let's say that I live long enough to see that in a newspaper in the wild. The last wild mountain. Absolutely awful. But at least when they're gone, there'll be no more mountain gorilla versions of consciousness to suffer. So in that sense, that maybe there's some cosmic grace in this. It sounds like an awful thing to say, but in the end, on that level, extinction both of us, but the animals whose lives we've ruined, and maybe again, cosmic grace, the idea of that's the exit plan. It's not much to hang your hopes on, but yeah, I think about that a good deal.
I mean, there's also,
I think about the way that we justify essentially torturing animals and again, I'm a scientist. We torture animals for in scientific research. We torture animals in industrialized agriculture, and you can actually find many people that will justify this. But look at the benefit to humanity. I mean, what a level of hubris that we apply. But we've been doing this since we emerged from the Rift Valley. So it's been a long-term process, but.
And there's also, I haven't done a lot of research into this, but you know much more about it than I do. But there's also the huge amount of suffering that we don't inflict on animals in the wild.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's the way that biology is set up. I mean, if you can bleep it out, but I'll use the F word. I mean, this is sort of one of my rules of rules for Earth rules. I'm going to come up with a book of Earth, but zoology is a fucking nightmare. It is. I mean, I think David Attenborough in those aforementioned, in these wonderful documentaries, I mean, he'd often just show the splendors of life, and then towards the end, at least in the documentaries when I was growing up, they would be a little bit on the destruction and nastiness of nature at the end. But no, that's what defines it.
Yeah.
And that's what Charles Darwin, one of the things that he struggled with, the awfulness of nature, and he sought to sort of push predation aside by thinking it was only sort of the old and the weak animals that were being attacked by, and eaten by other animals, that it was nature itself was a lot more sort of placid and nurturing. But it's not. We're set up this way. Energy transfer demands suffering. Well, the combination of the need to eat and being conscious, and what's changing too, I mean, over in relatively recent terms, is our understanding of the sensitivity of non-human animals, the way that animals, insects, and other animals with tiny brains nevertheless have this sort of exquisite conscious experience, and I would say a sense of self. There's philosophers that would disagree with that point of view, which is brilliantly interesting science, but it just means that things are even worse and there's even more suffering than someone like Darwin could possibly have imagined.
Yeah. There's one last thing I wanted to bring up with you. I have been writing about and thinking about moving away from this system. I haven't spoken to you a lot about that because it's not so relevant, but I personally, I'm very, very pessimistic about life itself, about nature, and about the system. I think nature is really nasty, and I think coupled with the system, I think nature is worse than the system, but the system that the system at least takes care of quite a lot of us, right? But the system in which we live in is so exploitative, and it's just so it's leading to more and more mental health problems amongst so many people, and physical health problems, all exacerbated by the monetary system and the legal and political systems that are all entwined with that. And I don't know what to say to my children, for example, because they are being sucked into this crazy system, which over the past 2 years, the way I've seen it, I've seen the partial takeover of AI, which runs social media and has been messing with the minds of so many people. I call it AS, artificial stupidity, and where this is heading to in terms of surveillance and just crazy things going on in the world, and what the system is offering people in terms of entertainment, and just there's so many aspects of the system that I'd rather my children had an option to do things differently. And so I've been writing about and thinking about and also avoiding writing about the idea, or thinking about the idea of moving away from my extremely comfortable life, which I have. I live in a suburb in London. I have a very, very comfortable existence, and part of me thinks that what I should be doing is planning to move out somewhere rural, to be part of some kind of conscious community that was working towards weaning ourselves off the system. Not completely, because I think that would be I don't think I would want to do that, right? I don't think it would be worth it. I don't think it's almost impossible, but to slowly start to wean ourselves off the system, to grow our own food, to slowly do that, not necessarily, just cut ourselves off from it, but to slowly get to start growing our own food, start maybe finding ways to harvest energy and harvest water, so that my children and myself, but my children would have an opportunity, if they wanted to live differently, and to try and divorce themselves to some extent from this awful system. The problem is, as I said, to go out into nature, I think is even worse, right? Because nature's cruel and heartless. So to live out in nature, I can't even imagine how difficult that would be. Yeah, and especially as I'm in this really comfortable position. What would you say to that idea, and what do you say to your stepchildren about what we should do, if anything, to plan for the collapse of civilization?
That's really interesting. Have you ever read Voltaire's Candide?
I haven't yet, but
you should read that, because at the end of Candide, it's a very, very humorous book. It's quite a short read, but at the end of they've been through all of this suffering and dealt with this Inquisition, but at the end of the book, they end up on a farm, and Voltaire, very, very clever man, brilliant writer, and he was sort of saying the only answer here is to keep busy, but also he'd form this little farming commune at the end of the book. I love that. You mentioned my stepchildren here, my stepdaughter. She actually is suggesting something like this for our sort of extended family, that perhaps finding some place, some property where we could live differently, and she's actually a horticulturalist, and so she's got some experience in this area. So it's interesting that she's thinking in that way. But as you say too, I mean, it's a lot to to give up. I mean, I live in this college town. It's a life really of great, albeit, you know, middle class privilege. We've got I got a dentist office close by. We've got a great hospital system. There's a Starbucks over there. I mean, do I really want to give that? We got a bike trail so I can go out in nature when I want, but do I really want to give that up? I mean, I suppose it shows the degree to which, maybe this is a good sort of area to close, the degree to which I am completely part of this problem. For me to say, well, I'm a step parent, so hey, I didn't cause any problems here. I'm awful. I'm a terrible consumer. I love buying stuff that I don't need. No, I think I need it. I mean, you know, anyway, we buy stuff. I'm getting spending money this afternoon, I know, on some new higher end, you know, earpods. Do I really need earpods or earbuds? But I think I do. So I'm adding to the economy, and yeah, I think your position sounds very attractive. I actually find that a number of my students really, that this would resonate with them. In fact, one of them has talked about this, sort of forming some kind of a commune, but we know you pick your commune mates very carefully, right? Because we know how badly, from so many experiences of sort of cults in the 1960s and 70s, well, up to today, how badly things can go. But I don't know what the answer is. Do I want to end up, you know, if I had the money, would I rather end my life living in a high-rise in New York City where I've spent a good deal of time but couldn't afford to live, or on a farm somewhere? Yeah, probably on a farm, even though you're surrounded by the hideousness of nature. Yeah, probably.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating talking to you. And I'm going to put the links in the description box for your books or any website that you'd like me to do. And maybe we'll talk again sometime. Enjoy the.
It was a pleasure talking with you. Yeah, thank you. I mean, the only thing would be my website, themycologist.com. Information there, including some essays related to these topics. So
I just want to ask you one last question that I've just put in my mind, because my son is very interested in psychedelics and the use of psychedelics.
Oh yeah,
mushrooms or in medical use. Is that also part of your research? Psychedelic?
I'm actually not a part of my research, but I'm actually working on a book now in which that features, and it's psychedelic mushrooms are, I find them fascinating. I've never actually experienced this myself, and there are probably some good reasons for that. But I'm very interested in the therapeutic uses of magic mushrooms, or rather this compound psilocybin from magic mushrooms. I mean, they seem to have these remarkable effects upon one's sense of well-being, in palliative care, end-of-life care in particular. Very, very useful in changing a patient's perspective. I find that absolutely fascinating. The thing is, with these studies, none of them are long-term studies. It doesn't matter if you're dealing with end-of-life care, if the boosting experience in the short term. But in terms of the effects of these compounds longer term, in terms of sort of good peer-reviewed, placebo-controlled science, I think the jury's still out there. But it raises a whole series of fascinating issues about the power of these compounds to change our state of consciousness. I mean, I've seen it likened most closely to the experience of a lucid dream, which is something I used to lucid dream when I was younger, which is a tremendously elevating experience. So yeah, I've got a lot of time for that. The problem in my field is that when you start talking about magic mushrooms, it also attracts a lot of sheer craziness and mushrooms of the gods and all that. So I have zero time for that. But yeah, overall fascinating topic.
Yeah, I mean, I just one last thing about that. Sorry, is that I often think to myself that because we're on this course to extinction, and because it might well be faster than we think, you know, I would be in favor, and I think it should have been done a long time ago, of really sort of ramping up the, you know, like they did with the vaccines. I think they should be ramping up the research on all these different compounds and psychedelics that are, you know, that can be used in both palliative care and also sites of medical healing. I think they should be, you know, that I think that they should be decriminalized, and because if we're coming towards the end, we might as well enjoy it.
Many of my students, I mean, a far higher proportion of my students today suffer from, you know, clinically diagnosed depression than was ever diagnosed when I was an undergraduate. And so, that certainly resonates with me. I suppose you can also go down. So maybe magic mushroom compound psilocybin would be sort of a useful therapeutic, but I mean, many people use alcohol, another fungal product, yeast alcohol, as a therapeutic. And I certainly did for many years. I actually quit drinking last year, and it was transformative. I haven't had any alcohol now for, I mean, I wasn't a, you know, bottle of whiskey in the gutter, but I certainly was drinking too much, and I don't miss it at all. But again, maybe that comes from a privileged position where I'm not, you know, the kind of anxiety that I deal with is pretty, you know, quotidian. It's not. Another topic. But
another topic. Thank you very much indeed. It's lovely talking to you. And
thanks for talking. It's wonderfully talking to you. It's fascinating. Yeah. Have a good rest of your day in your lovely garden. You're supposed to get biblical rain today. I saw on.
We had rain. We had rain.
Sky News supposed to be.
We've had quite a lot of rain already. Yeah, I think we're getting more. All right. Bye.
Very good. Talk to you again, perhaps. Bye for now.